All right, we're going to get going, and folks can join us as they come in at their leisure. My name is Ellie Reese. I am the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator at the Wallkill Valley Land Trust. So, my role in your presentation today is the tech role. So, I am here to help anyone who has any tech issues. If there's any specific technical questions, please feel free to reach out to me via the chat. That way I can address any issues you might have. Just to give you a little bit of how the flow of the evening is going to go, if you'd like to keep your video on or turn your video on, please feel free to do so. We do ask you to remain muted until called on by name during the Q&A portion of the evening. We will have a Q&A at the end. Questions can be asked in the chat, or they can, which will be read to by yours truly during the Q&A. And at the end of the presentation, you can either put your questions in the chat at the end of the presentation, or you can add them during the presentation. That way you might not forget your thought and get out what you want to ask. If anyone at any time runs into any kind of technical issues or has any questions for me as the host of the Zoom meeting, always reach out. I am here to help. What else can I say? That's right. A bit of what you can expect for how everything's going to flow. Once I've bored you with all the tech details, I'll turn it over to the Wallkill Valley Land Trust's Executive Director, Christy DeBoer. She'll give you a few words about the Land Trust and introduce our presenter this evening. After the presentation, we'll have a moderated Q&A. I will serve as the moderator, and our presenter will answer any questions he can. And then we'll have just a short farewell. All links, as well as resources that will be shared during the presentation, will be shared in a follow-up email, which will include all of the slides in the presentation, so you will have clickable links to use. If you would like to share resources of your own in links in the chat, please go ahead and do so. I will also include those in the follow-up email after the presentation. All right, I think that's all I have for now, so I'm going to turn it over to Christy. Christy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you, Ellie, for explaining all of our tech. And I know everyone's excited that I am not in charge of the tech. I even had trouble signing in. So you guys did a better job than I did already tonight. I'm really excited for tonight's programming. Some of you know about the Land Trust, but I'm going to just do a quick overview of what the Wallkill Valley Land Trust is. We are a nonprofit organization. One of our founding members is actually part of this meeting tonight. And we do conservation easements and public land protection here in Ulster County. We have over 3,000 acres of protected land that consists of 41 conservation easements and also properties open to the public, such as Joppenberg Mountain, the Nyquist Harcourt Wildlife Sanctuary, and the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail. We have a small staff of 4. The other 2 staff members that are not present tonight are our stewardship staff, and they are in charge of stewarding our conservation easements and working on our public lands. Some of you are aware we've been doing some invasive plant removals on our properties, which has been really exciting. But the board's push beyond continuing farmland protection, and especially open spaces, trails, farms, our core mission is the educational aspect about conservation and some different topics out there that are of interest. We have had some really robust educational programming this year, a lot of walks and talks with trees, various other subjects. And when my board member, Arif Khan, offered to do this programming tonight, I was really excited. This is a topic that I'm learning more and more about myself, and I think it's really important one for folks to explore for the future of where they will rest themselves. And I think it can tie in with the larger conservation vision that I know we all have for this region. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Arf, and I really thank you all for joining us. This is fantastic.
Great. Well, thank you, Christy, and thank you, Ellie, and the Wallkill Valley Land Trust for organizing this. And thank you guys, thank you, men and women here, for being here. I hope this is an interesting and educational presentation. I find it interesting. So I live in Wallkill in the town of Shangam, and I'm a board member on the land trust. And I took an interest in death, basically, we'll say. And it was actually piqued by losses in my own family and how the death was handled. I'm sure many people here have had to deal with that. And for me, I just thought there's better ways, and and I think things need to be talked about. It's this funny thing that we do, this inevitable thing that will happen to all of us that we avoid talking about. So I like talking about it, and I'm not an expert. By no means am I an expert. I just have an interest. But I have friends that are experts, and including a really good friend of mine, Michael Hebb, who wrote this book. I don't know if it's backwards or forwards, but it's called Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner. So I think Michael will be very happy with me today because I'm talking about death, not over dinner, but maybe some of you are eating. But really, the point of the book is to get people talking about it. And I think that within that, sharing what's important to you, maybe your fears, maybe, everything around just talking to your loved ones. So I hope, if nothing else, this talk will inspire you to talk to your loved ones about death. And I should have said, trigger warning, we're going to be talking about death. So if you have issues with that, perhaps this is not the right presentation for you. Another trigger warning, we're going to be talking about open space. So if you have a fear of open space, this might not be the presentation for you. And that's not the end of my little jokes. That's the other trigger. I might make a few inappropriate or bad jokes, but I know Christy's on my side with that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, let's go. So I'm going to be talking about green burials and conservation burial grounds, and death care. In some more general terms. So I'll give you an overview and talk about some issues, and we can have a conversation at the end, because I'm sure there are folks here that probably know more than me or have something to add. So that would be great for the benefit of the group, benefit of myself, always learning. So let's see. Let's start with Barbie. I don't know if you've seen the Barbie movie, but really if you haven't seen it, it's an existential crisis that Barbie has when she brings up the idea of death, and it stops the party. And I share that with Barbie, where I start talking about death and stopping the party. But I think it's an important thing in this movie that to think about death in a way that inspires a sort of greater appreciation for life, and that's what it does for me. And that's what it did for Barbie. I think it gave her meaning. So if you haven't seen the Barbie movie, it's my recommendation. You should see it. And I'm going to guess many of you here, because the idea of being buried in a very expensive casket, which took a lot of resources, inside a concrete vault, inside a manicured lawn that's sprayed with pesticides and herbicides and mowed regularly to look neat, is not something that is appealing to you. Because I will share that this is not something that's appealing to me. It just seems like an utter waste of money. Here I am editorializing that, but it just seems like something that I don't want my loved ones or myself to spend a lot of money on. And besides the financial implications, there's environmental implications, which I think many of you share. So this is the sort of common practice for dealing with death. Actually, the other more common practice is cremation. We'll talk about that too. And actually, just in the last couple of years, cremation is now more prevalent than burial. So it's I think it's about 52% to 40-something%. There's other ways to be dealt with after you pass. So we'll talk about that too. Right. So as I mentioned, to me, the modern burial practices, they're expensive. They feel overly commodified, resource intensive, wasteful, and often, your loved ones or you yourself who've dealt with the passing of a loved one have had to make these decisions. What kind of casket, what kind of stone marker, what kind of other add-ons you'll be buying. And I felt myself in dealing with the passing of my father, I was like, well, I have to express my love for my father by buying more stuff, right? Isn't that the way we often deal with these things? But so my question was, how did we get here, right? How did we get to this place where this is a thing that's done? And the answer is actually the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, prior to the 1860s, 1850s, 1860s, everyone practiced pretty much green burial. People were typically buried in their family plot if they had land or nearby cemeteries. And, there weren't extravagant caskets. It was probably a simple pine casket or a shroud. Your family members would bury your grave, dig your grave. And it was a pretty simple thing. But with the Civil War, we had a lot of deaths in a short amount of time, and the bodies needed to be transported. While, preservation of bodies has been used throughout history in some way with mummification in ancient Egypt, and in other ways, it wasn't a widespread technique, the idea of formaldehyde or other chemicals to preserve your body. It wasn't widely practiced until the Civil War. And actually, more specifically, with Abraham Lincoln's passing, 1860 something, he passed, and there was actually a sort of tour. His body was taken on tour for 2 weeks, I believe. And this popularized the practice of preserving a body. Let's see, it was a funeral procession. So you could say Lincoln was a bit of an influencer in the embalming practice. So after that, embalming became more popular. And actually, the idea of a funeral director became more of a profession. And typically there would be carpenters that would be building coffins. People would ask for more add-ons, and carpenters transitioned into, or coffin makers transitioned into funeral directors. So when discussing these options, we're thinking about environmental impacts. I mentioned the coffin, which requires resources, wood and steel, the embalming fluid, which can be hazardous to the people doing the embalming, the funeral directors or the folks doing the embalming. There's the land use aspect, where often cemeteries are not biodiverse places. They're typically manicured monocrop grass lawns, which require pesticides and mowing. And then I mentioned cremation, which is now practiced more than burial. Cremation, by and large, from my analysis, is a more environmentally friendly option than being buried in a casket and embalmed. But it does require high intense heat, which has emissions aspects and a carbon footprint. So let's see, I could give numbers. Where are we? Let me just see. So about 50%, 1,200 to 2,000 degrees. Average cremation takes about 2 hours, the equivalent of driving 600 miles and 150 pounds of CO2. But it's not a bad option. And I thought it would be good to present a legal framework. When I mentioned funeral directors, some of you may not know, but in New York State, along with Connecticut and Louisiana, a licensed funeral director is required to handle the body after passing. It's not a requirement in every other state, but whatever you do decide, a licensed funeral director is required. I learned that caskets are not required. So, as is practice in Judaism and Islam, a shroud is often used. So, a shroud can be used. I've seen cardboard caskets if you wanted an environmental option, or those wicker baskets. So, there's no requirement for actually a casket. And some of you might know that recently human composting has been allowed in New York State, legalized in New York State, and I can talk more about that. Um, a person who's popularized it, Katrina Spade, who's in Seattle, has developed a system. The other surprising thing I learned in my research is home burial is allowed in New York State. There's no state or county prohibitions on home burial. New York is a home rule state, which means local jurisdictions, municipalities can create rules around land use and those issues. And I've checked with a few towns, and my summary of it is there's a lot of gray area. Depending on the town, I've spoken to a few towns, and they've all dealt with home burials. Typically, you would reach out to your town clerk, and who would probably direct you to the building inspector or someone who's been assigned to that. So my guess is that there's not a lot of enforcement. There are rules that each town can set. Typically, you should be away, the body should be buried I think it's 100 feet or 50 feet away from a water source if there is a water source on your property. But other than that, the grave needs to be marked. And I think there's a requirement for it to be mentioned in, I guess, the title or the deed. Obviously, we don't want people building a building on where someone was buried. So I also thought it'd be useful to have a framework for your decisions, or my decisions, in that way. So to decide what's best for you, obviously you have your personal wishes. I don't know if you want to leave a legacy, or like me, I'd be opposed to being buried in a very expensive casket. So when my wife and I drew up our will and trust, I opted for language that said the most environmentally minimally resource intensive option available. Which gets to the next point, is you want to think about your loved ones, obviously. What is the burden, or what is the impact on your loved ones and community? And can you actually design an end-of-life celebration, or what you will, or a memorial that actually helps your loved ones grieve, whatever it is? And there's financial implications, right? If you haven't set aside funds, or if you don't have the funds, there'll be financial implications. Then, of course, there's religious or cultural context and customs. As I mentioned, in Judaism and Islam, they basically call for green burial, a natural burial. That you're typically, and I have a friend who's a landscape architect who designed a green burial ground. It was for a Jewish congregation. So there are contexts and customs because you want to, I guess, honor your loved ones if they have the similar beliefs. Costs, that's an obvious thing. And then I think what's more of our focus here is the environmental impact or benefit, right? And what is the impact of your decision on land use, on the chemicals that are required, resource consumption, emissions, and it's good to consider travel and all that. So if you require your body to, if you want to be composted, but you want to do it in Washington, that has a emissions impact. So I've arranged the different options from green to less green. This is, of course, not a scientific thing, but on the most green side, it would be, in my mind, you and your friends have some shovels while you're still alive. I kind of want to do this, but anyway, friends make fun of me for it. But you have your friends dig a grave on property, and you are buried in a shroud. That would be the most green option. I'm just going to go on the top and then I'll go on, actually, maybe jump to the bottom. The bottom is a burial at sea, which I learned is allowed. You have to be 3 nautical miles away from shore at a depth of 600 feet. And there's a requirement to weigh down the body. So the old concrete or cement shoes would be in place or something like that. Maybe something that will create a little bit of habitat for fish. On the top to the right, that is the cremation option. As I mentioned, it is greener than doing what we call a traditional American burial with the sealed casket in a concrete vault in a manicured lawn. On the bottom center that's a photo from Recompose, which is the outfit in Seattle that has really popularized human composting, and I can talk more detail about that in a few more slides. And then the bottom right, that scary looking contraption, that is called aquamation, also known as water cremation or alkaline hydrolysis, which is a greener option than, let's see, I would say it's a greener option than incinerating the body. It uses a very alkaline water, high pressure and heat that's used basically like lye that decomposes your body. But I should mention this is not legal in New York State yet. It's been debated. There's been discussion at the New York State government to legalize it. Many other states have it legalized, but there's still debate around that. The one option I will mention, I don't know if any of you saw this TED Talk. It got over 1.8 million views by artist J. Rim Lee. She talked about a mushroom burial suit. The only issue with this is it doesn't really work. It was a concept she was playing around with, and she is an artist, so it was great that she brought up the idea of decomposition as a natural part of our ecology, but the mushroom burial suit and impregnating it with spores does not actually work to degrade the human body. You'll have better luck with composting with straw or just being buried in the ground. The other option I wanted to mention, this is called a Tibetan sky funeral, and those are vultures. This is also not legal in New York. I don't think it's not legal in the US. It's legal in Tibet. And obviously, if you live in a rural area like I do, you've seen the turkey vultures take apart deer carcasses in quick time. So I would consider this a green option, but it is not legal because it's considered, I don't know, I think it's, yeah, for various reasons. So let's talk about green burial. A green or natural burial is defined as does not use embalming fluid or a burial vault. Instead, the remains are placed directly in the earth, allowing the body to decompose naturally. Process has a minimal impact on the environment and actually improves soil health and maintains natural habitat for local flora and fauna. So as I mentioned, you could use a biodegradable casket, a fancy one like this wicker basket, or a simple burial shroud made of natural materials. But basically materials that would not degrade or interfere with the decomposition of the body. And they've done a lot of research and found that actually having air gaps around the body is helpful for decomposition. The principles that you're caring for the dead with minimal environmental impact, you're reducing carbon emissions, you're protecting worker health, and you're restoring or improving habitat. As I mentioned, the most eco-friendly property if you have rural property. Cemeteries are allowed by right, and family burial plots are allowed by right in residential agricultural zones. And from what I've read, family burial plots may be up to 3 acres. You also are tax exempt if you establish a burial plot on your property. So that would require some legal work to or paperwork to get that tax exemption. So I wanted to talk about human composting. It's also called natural organic reduction. Shown here is Katrina Spade's Recompose setup in Seattle, and there's like a high design involved because she was an architecture student at UMass Amherst, actually with a friend of mine, and so she started this as a project, her thesis project, with coming up with more environmentally friendly ways to deal with bodies, especially for people in cities. So this this method she's developed, it uses a lot of straw and wood chips, basically. The body's placed in a vessel, takes about 5 to 7 weeks, and then soil bacteria, nematodes, and fungi work on decomposing your corpse, which is then removed from the vessel and allowed to cure for 3 to 5 weeks. And then after some, I think they turn it, basically your body turns into compost, which your friends and loved ones can use in their garden. And typically what you get is about a cubic yard of soil. So basically enough soil to fill a Tacoma or one Ford F-150 pickup bed. So that is another option. I know there's a couple of different companies that are looking to launch in New York State, and actually Katrina, I think, is involved in one, but I don't know if they're active yet. That was just last year or the year before that New York legalized human composting. So I mentioned the burial at sea option. I was surprised to learn it's legal. And then this alkaline hydrolysis, I think I went over everything, but it's potassium hydroxide heated to a temperature of 320 degrees. And the body's broken down. Takes 4 to 6 hours and uses about a quarter of the energy of cremation. So those are a summary of the main options for, we'll say, green death care. And now I'll shift into the idea of a conservation burial ground. So the idea of a burial ground, it's basically you're taking a piece of property just like the land trust does and preserving land, open space, enhancing habitat for flora and fauna. And in the case of a conservation burial ground, you're combining it with providing a place for people to have green burials. So typically with green burial grounds or conservation burial grounds, there's no vaults. Everything is biodegradable. There's no herbicides or fertilizers used. Typically, you minimize the marking. There are markings allowed, but most have rules about they should be local natural materials. And there are a number of them throughout the state. I've marked them here on a map, or actually I got this map that's marked. The closest ones you might know is the Rosendale Cemetery has a green burial area as part of the cemetery. And the last time I called them, which was a few months ago, it's $1,500 for a plot and another $1,000 for the opening and closing, so $2,500. And that's close to home in Ulster County. Across the river, there's a Rhinebeck Cemetery, which is managed by Suzanne Kelly. And I'll give you a link. She's written a book about greening death. She's very knowledgeable, and I'll put a link in there's a link in this presentation that will be shared with you, so you can look at her book. Those are the two closest options. And as Christy mentioned, I did bring up the idea of, since I'm on the board of a land trust, could we do this in this area? Could we provide another space? And Christy's supportive. I think it's just identifying a property where we could do this, where there's a willing partner that would be willing to to create an easement, conservation easement, and also have a place for natural burials. So that is the end. I think I went through that fairly quickly. I'm sure there's questions, thoughts. We can open it up. And yeah, and you can, if you think of something later, you can get in touch with me or Christy or Ellie. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
oh, wait, I like to include actionable stuff. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, like if nothing else, discuss these options and wishes with your loved ones so they're not guessing what you would like. That's probably what I think is a great gift we can give. There's plenty of books, online resources, and then of course the legal stuff, really useful. And licensed funeral director. All funeral directors are open to you having conversations about what the options are. And there's nothing binding about discussion. So I've spoken to a couple of funeral directors, and they're all interested. And if you're interested in the home burial and you know, that's something that you want to do, you can talk to your local town. Like I said, it's either a town clerk or a building inspector and enforcement officer, depending on your town. You could go ahead and buy a plot at the Rosendale Cemetery, or if you want to allocate a portion of your land for conservation easement, you can talk to us at the Land Trust. Now that's the end.
Well, thank you so much. It was a very informative presentation. We do have a question, someone who raised their hand, and I will get to you in just a second. I just want to make sure that everybody knows how that they can indicate to me that they would like to unmute themselves and ask their question. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's going to be a heart with the word react. If you click there, you'll see a large button at the bottom of that little pop-up window that says raise
You
hand.
have a
All you have to
question? No.
do.
You want to just see what the answer.
Okay.
I know
I think
you're already
somebody is on.
established. You
Here
got,
we
you
go.
got
There we go. So our first question comes from Kitty Brown. Kitty, if you would like to unmute yourself, please go right ahead.
Hi there. Well, I was surprised at what a lighthearted and enjoyable presentation this was. Just a few.
I stopped hearing her. Ellie?
Yes, I think that somebody else. Hold on one second. We're going to try and get her back. Kitty, can you unmute yourself one more time? We can't hear you, Kitty. I'm so sorry. No.
Hmm.
Let me see if there's something I can help with.
It might help if she would call back in.
Yeah, Kitty, did you want to log out and log back in with the same link you used before? Sometimes that resets your microphone. Thank you so much, Manager. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question?
I'll ask a question.
Go right ahead.
Oops, sorry, my hair. What's the appeal of aquamation? I just never heard of that before, and I just personally didn't really understand the appeal of that.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be more environmentally friendly than I'm losing the word. What do you call it when you're incinerated?
Yeah.
Why can't
And what was it again? You're in like an acid or something like that?
Yeah, it's actually the opposite. It's basic if you remember chemistry.
Oh.
So alkaline is like a high pH. So it's potassium hydroxide in a high pressure container with heat. Basically like lye, which is caustic, which dissolves your body. And
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
So sorry, cremation. It's supposed to be it had less emissions and less environmentally impactful than cremation.
Yeah, interesting. I just never
So
heard of it
yeah,
before.
I know, especially with the photo I show, it doesn't look appealing, but
Yeah, it looked kind of scary at first.
right.
Okay, Kitty is back. Kitty, are you unmuted?
We'll see.
Oh,
Yes,
great.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, I did not expect this to be such a lighthearted and enjoyable presentation. So thank you so much. When my kids went to high school here in New Paltz, there was actually something called a death class. And it was one semester, and they learned all about how unnecessary embalming and all that was. And it was enormously helpful to me when my father died because my kid said, Mom, here's what you need to do, and here's what you don't need to do. Um, so my husband and my mother are both buried at the Rosendale Green Cemetery. Um, it's a little upsetting, tearing up all that forest. So it would be wonderful if the Land Trust, I would be happy to help with a fundraising effort, if the Land Trust had a piece of disturbed property that you could convert. But one thing that was extraordinary to me when my mom died last year, um, and she was just in a shroud. The local funeral home did everything I asked for, and I was not able to actually watch her be lowered. But my grandchildren did. They wanted to see it. They wanted to say goodbye. They wanted to throw flowers in. It was so personal and so moving and not scary.
Hmm.
So, thank you for doing this presentation. And I look forward to, I hope, being buried on one of your burial plots, but if not, I'll go back to Rosendale.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. That's amazing that they had a death class in high school. I would have, yeah. That's good.
I actually, Arif, had a follow-up question to the aquamation
Yeah.
question. You talked about some chemicals used in the process. Is there any chemical byproducts after the process is complete that need to be dealt with?
That is, from what I understand from a person who's a crematorium professional who attended my last talk, explained to me that there was debate on how to handle the effluent, I guess you would call. Um, so
Interesting.
yeah, so I don't know the actual impacts because I've read different things that it's not that problematic. Lye is used in the production of soap. So it's lye is commonly used in industrial processes. So
Understandable. Okay. Is there anyone else who has a question or would like
or
to make
comment.
a comment? Yeah.
Yeah,
I was gonna
Very
happy
make
to
a
learn.
comment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
I'm not sure if anybody else on the Zoom call heard. I briefly just saw something on the internet saying that you can be buried and like a tree planted with you. Has anybody else heard about that? Anything about that? Gonna
Yeah,
assume
I mean,
not, but I think it was pretty cool because I know Kitty mentioned like, you know, you sometimes have to cut down trees or forests or something. So I thought it was a cool idea that you could be planted with a tree.
Yeah, they have tree pods.
Oh,
oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
what does that mean, a tree pod?
So they would take your cremated remains maybe
Hmm.
and put it in this little, I guess you want to say what they would put your tree root ball in, like a canvas, and then put you in the ground with the tree and
Oh,
plant the tree. And so your ashes would nourish the tree as it's growing.
that's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was like you were, yeah, I didn't know how it worked, but that's really cool.
Yeah, they have that. I researched. I've seen some of it online, um, because I've been doing my own research on what I want to do with my remains and how I want my kids and the rest of my family know what my wishes were. So, and for me, I have a rare cancer, so we don't know when my end date will be, but I'm preparing for it. And I just bought a eco biodegradable uh, pillow for my cremated remains so that it could be buried in the ground. So, yeah. So yeah, it's not a hard subject for me to talk about. So I have a book at home. It's called I'm Dead, Now What? And it has all the information that everybody's going to need for banking and passwords and where am I going and what am I doing and who to contact and so I think that's very important for people to really think about eventually down the line. And for me, it came a little bit sooner than later. So, and I didn't want my children who are adults to be buried with it or my partner. And, and they all know that these are my wishes. So, I'm going to be cremated and put in this little pillow and off I go. So, and that's going to be it. Anyway.
Thank you for sharing that, Donna. I think it's a really, lovely way to think about, you're going to be cremated and put in a pillow and sent off on your way. It kind of gives it a light onto the next chapter kind of feeling.
Yeah. My eternal soul will be out there, my spirit, and I'll be watching out for everybody else.
Is there anybody else who'd like to share their experience with us? Yeah, go ahead, Christy.
I had a question, and it's mostly and you've covered this a little bit, Arf, so I apologize to have you repeat. My best friend is Jewish, and I was talking about this upcoming program, and she was talking about the Jewish beliefs kind of already do something like this.
Mhm.
So is it correct that in Jewish cemeteries this is already the practice? And I wish it would catch on a little bit more. When I spoke to her about it, I thought we'd have this big, and she goes, "Yeah, that's what I'm doing." And I
Yeah.
went, "Oh, okay." So that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not really a question, just a kind of a clarification where I guess I just kind of assume that this is a new concept. So you're giving us some of the history of how we got to this, expensive box and chemicals and all of this came from. I've learned a lot.
Well, good. Good. Yeah, but you're right on. That's the Jewish approach is simple burial. I don't know all the rules, but and actually I was brought up in Islam and it's pretty similar. So my dream is a joint Jewish Muslim burial ground where it's all the natural burial ground, right? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
She was explaining, the
shrouds.
pine box and a white cotton shroud and no chemicals.
Yep.
And just as an aside, it's what my mother has shared. She's always wanted, when my grandfather passed away, we couldn't get a pine box. In Florida, we weren't allowed to, especially since he was going into the military cemetery. So big learning experience there.
Right.
But
I
yeah,
should
thank you
mention
all.
there's places that are kind of underwater and
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
Orleans that there's crypts, so they're above ground cemeteries, and a lot of Florida is dealing with uh, right
Yeah,
sea level rise.
literally as it came out of my mouth, all of the stars aligned to be like, oh yeah, wait, that's underwater. Sorry guys, I've been up here too long. I kind of forgot where I came from, Florida. Anyone else has less obvious questions, I invite you to do so. You're gonna ruminate on my Florida roots for a moment.
I have a question, but I wanted to give the space to somebody else if they wanted to ask a question. No? Okay, so my question, Arif, is you mentioned the cost of a green burial at the Rosendale Cemetery.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you also did some research on what the average cost of a traditional burial would be with embalming and casket. Like, can you talk about the cost differential?
I should have done that, but when I talked to someone, I don't want to quote this, but it's like $8,000, $8 to $10,000 is on the lower end of things.
Holy smokes, so that's
and
significant.
well, what I didn't include in the Green Burial, like I mentioned, in New York State, it's one of 3 states that requires a licensed funeral director. So there's transport fees that you would have to involve a funeral director there. So the costs I did provide were just the cemetery costs. And yeah, coffins are expensive. You can, I mean, I suppose we can Google them, but I'm pretty sure 8 to 10,000 is typical. And maybe someone else on the call knows.
Kitty, do you know?
Yeah, I was surprised. It was not a lot cheaper to go with a green burial. Um, they have pretty much within 3 days. We were trying to get family together, and the funeral home said, things are happening with the body, and we need to get this done fairly soon. But I think the funeral costs were about 6,000, which I was surprised at. And then the Rosendale Green Cemetery was 2,500. So it's not necessarily cheaper, but it's a lot less intrusive on the planet.
Understood.
Again, going back to my Florida experience, the lowest we could get was 15,000 for casket and just the very basic, no frills, no. So that was pretty staggering and upsetting to some of my other family members.
Oh,
didn't realize
okay.
expenses involved. Yeah. And Manna, I'm right there with you. A basket lined with moss. I like that.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Another question I had is, do you have any kind of I don't want to say tips and tricks, but any recommendations on how to start the conversation with your family? Because they can be hard conversations, especially if your younger family isn't ready to have that conversation with, their parent or grandparent. So I'm just wondering if you have any kind of, tried and true methods on how to start that conversation.
I was going to say you could read this book my friend wrote, but I've asked him the same question because I've tried to bring it up with my mother. And I don't know if it's similar with your experience, but she's like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that. Why do you want to talk about that?" And I asked Michael, the author of the book, I said, what do I do? He said, "You just keep trying, and in small ways. Like, don't try to just talk about everything, but talk about certain aspects. Like, what do you want to do about this, or how would you, do you want to have a gathering of people? It's like, who do you want to be there?" Yeah, so he says just keep trying.
I have a
And I know
follow-up question.
that's not a tip and trick. It's just persistence. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations, what first steps for somebody who is looking into, an alternative burial, where they should start? Because it might seem very overwhelming.
So I have resources in the presentation. There's a bunch of links. I suppose start there because I've collected what I think are good links. So yeah, that would be and there's a number of good books, and some of them I've linked there.
Awesome.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate everyone who's shared their experience. If anybody else wants to speak up and kind of share before we close out, what has been shared so far has been really eye-opening and lovely. So
I'd like to tell you.
Yep,
Yeah,
Faye's
I'd like to
raising her hand.
say
Go for it,
something.
Faye. Yes.
Thank you very much for bringing up this subject. It's very important, as is a person's right to die in whichever way they choose, which is a whole other subject. And I'm sorry more people didn't join. And I agree, we just keep talking about it.
well, even if folks couldn't join this evening, we are recording tonight, and this recording will be available on YouTube. And I will share the link with everyone who's registered here tonight, and they can then share that link with anyone else they think could, really use these resources.
So will you have the name of the book that Arif has been showing us somewhere
Yes,
on your
absolutely.
website? Great,
Yeah.
okay.
Absolutely. Manna, Joe, did you want to ask a question or have a comment?
I just thought it might be fun for folks to click on the Pete Seeger, Lee Hayes song about this. It's called Compost, and it's about Lee wants to be buried in his garden so that when his grandchildren eat the carrots, they'll be taking him back in or something like that. I'm not paraphrasing very well, but it's a fun song. So while the link is right there, might be a nice way to transition back. I don't mean for people to stay on, but if they click on the link, it'll be right there for them.
Good
Yes,
way
and
to
I
end
will make
tonight.
sure to include the link to that video in the follow-up email if anybody misses it in the chat right now or can't get to it right this second. But thank you so much, Manna. It's a wonderful way to kind of end this evening. Would be great for everybody to click on that link as they exited to kind of get that nice feeling. Okay, so once again, I'm going to offer the chance for anybody else who hasn't spoken up. If they would like to share anything, please feel free to do so now. Okay, well, I want to just say once again on behalf of myself, and Christy's going to say a few more words after I do, but I just really appreciate the openness and the willingness to speak about such a tough topic from everyone on the meeting tonight. So thank you very much. And Christy, I'm going to turn it to you.
Very much. I echo Ellie. Arif, every time I listen to you, I learn something. This is really incredible. I'm thrilled that we recorded it. We had about half of our signups show up, so I'm hoping everybody else is okay. But I'm thrilled that we're still going to be sharing this and we've captured the presentation. The Land Trust Board has discussed how we would obtain a property and manage that and what that would look like. It is a longer term goal, but it's something I can say that the entire organization is thinking about and interested in, and we do think it's an important part of conservation. I say often now it seems a little bit premature. At one point we're going to run out of land to protect, and our work is just going to be stewarding these lands. And a big part of that is also the people on them and the impacts that we're having. So I'm really thrilled to be having these conversations. I liked what you said, Kitty, about and Manajo also, these disturbed properties and looking at what those potentials might be. I hadn't thought of that before. So that's a really important point and something that we're going to continue to explore. It's not an easy, we'll just acquire a property and start doing it in a week. It's a more complex situation that we'd approach, but I'm thrilled that the board of the Wallkill Valley Land Trust is open to really exploring what that looks like and working with our community to hopefully see something like that happen in the future. So I really appreciate I would appreciate my board, and especially since one of my board members is on here. But that these conversations, these topics can occur. And I really thank you all for taking time. The last thing is, as always, the Wallkill Valley Land Trust survives completely on all of you, on our donors, and we really appreciate all of your support. It allows us to continue to protect our open spaces, trails, and farms, and it takes all of us to do this work. While I'm obviously biased, I love this job. We couldn't do this if it wasn't for all of you in our community really supporting us, volunteering, donating, sharing our work and what we do, and inviting others to learn more about us. So if you have like to donate, thank you, Ellie, for putting the link on. I was going to start to recite our website, so I appreciate you putting that on there. And also, if you have ideas of other educational programming, you want to talk about legacy planning, and if you want to leave the Wallkill Valley Land Trust in your estate, we have a donor who is considering offering a challenge match for people that we have share with us that we are in their estate planning for the future of the organization, and that's a really special way to help continue the legacy of our land protection, which is forever. And as we've talked about, while we're not forever, we're trying to make sure that our open spaces, trails, and farms are. So if you would like to discuss legacy planning or anything like that, myself and a couple members of my board are well versed and would love to talk to you about it. And every dollar really helps. So I really appreciate you all taking time. And I hope you all have a beautiful evening.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.